So I'm going to start with some introductions. So tonight we have our, let's say, new launch of the CRN panel, and we are talking about cricket gambling and match fixing. We've got an hour for the panel. So previously we've had 30 minutes, but for this new format, we've got an hour. I'm going to do an introduction to the panel shortly. We'll start with some opening questions and sense of the work that the panel are doing, and then we'll also open it up to questions from the audience as well, which you're happy for people to raise hands or to put questions in the chat, and we'll try and field them through the next hour. And we will keep to time in terms of finishing for 6 o'clock. So I'll start by introducing our panel this evening and thanking them for joining us. So Steve Menary is chairing our panel this evening. And Steve is a freelance journalist and researcher with expertise in match fixing and author of several academic books. And he's also part of the Cricket Research Network and has been part of the network since we joined. Our first panel member then is Will Gunn, who is a senior trader in Sporting Solutions. Will has worked in the gambling industry for over 10 years. He specialises in cricket, trading and pricing knowledge, particularly knowledgeable around sort of betting markets and pre and in-play odds movements across different platforms. Will has seen cricket gambling in different parts of the world, seeing the way money flows when a potential fix is taking place. And I should say that the panel are coming from different backgrounds and different expertise in terms of thinking about how we understand cricket gambling and match fixing. So welcome to Will. Our second panel member is Anca, and Anca is a PhD student at Sheffield Hallam, and as part of her PhD programme, she's undertaking research into the effects of gambling in women's professional cricket, football and rugby union. As part of her role as a senior research manager at EPIC, she works on numerous gambling research projects with cricketers playing at all levels, from academy to first team players, both men and women. She's also a member of the Sports Integrity Global Alliance Council, investigating different areas of sporting integrity, such as good governance, sponsorship, social good, sustainability, diplomacy, and law. And then our third panel member this evening is joining us from Loughborough University, Dr. Minhyeok, who is from the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences, and his research is a social political analysis of sport and the problems of match fixing, as well as looking at match fixing and safeguarding in sport. So I'm delighted to have you all here this evening as part of our discussion, and I'm going to hand over to Steve now to chair the rest of the discussion.
Thank you very much for that, Philippa. That's very kind of you. I'm going to try and take a bit of a backseat role as well as Philippa and just chair things. So I was just wondering if the three panelists, maybe we'll start as Will, as he's the top right of my screen, if you could spend a couple of minutes talking about the work that they've done, and maybe that will bring forth some questions from the audience, and I've got some things to discuss as well. So maybe, Will, if you wanted to go first, if that was all right. Please.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Hi guys. As Philippa mentioned, I've worked in the gambling industry for over 10 years now, specialising in cricket, trading and pricing. So my kind of day-to-day job would be researching a cricket match which is going to happen, deciding what the betting odds should be for a number of markets across the game. And then once the game's actually started, then I'll be live updating the odds based on what's happening in the game. And I think that one thing which will be useful for this panel is that I've been able to see money flowing through betting markets on betting exchanges, being able to notice when odds have shifted in a way which you wouldn't necessarily expect them to have shifted, and potentially something has happened on the pitch or something that you wouldn't expect to happen has happened. So I think that could be a good angle to look at how fixing can be seen live just through the weight of money which is put into betting markets.
All right. Cheers, Will. Thank you very much. Yeah, we can certainly go back to that. I think the movement of money is kind of key to it all, really, isn't it? Because an awful lot of match fixing, I think, is money laundering essentially, isn't it? You know, there's opportunistic match fixing, but I think a lot of it is by organised crime using illegal betting markets. So we can touch upon all that. Anca, would you like to, Anca-Maria, go next?
Yes, so hi guys, as Philippa mentioned, I've been working as a researcher in the gambling field for over 6 years, and I've done a lot of work trying to understand the gambling behaviors of elite athletes, looking at gambling participation levels, promo gambling levels, and trying to understand how the social and cultural factors actually influence athletes' gambling behaviors. And then, of course, also looking at how those gambling behaviors develop for them and how those can actually intersect with broader risks such as match fixing. For my PhD specifically, I've interviewed 5 female cricketers playing at the highest level, trying to understand, the normalization of gambling and how, their exposure to gambling through advertising and, sponsorship actually affects them, how it influences them to gamble, and what other potential risks it can cause.
Thank you very much. Minhyeok, would you like to finish up, please?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Minhyeok, and my research on sports betting and match fixing began with my PhD project, which looked into match fixing cases in football. And that work led me to another project in 2020 on match fixing monitoring system, more particularly funded by the IOC's Early Career Research Grant. And but my perspective, I'll say, is more I cannot take a political sociology approach, which is a little tricky to explain. So let me give you a sense of what that means. So maybe a good starting point might be the title of my PhD thesis, which was Sports on the Gambling Table, an Institutional Approach to Match Fixing. I used this metaphor, sports on the gambling table, to highlight how legal sports betting effectively relocates sports and athletes onto the gambling table, around which state sports organizations and betting companies run the business together and benefit from the revenues. So this kind of question, the kind of questions I normally deal with include: who puts sports on the gambling table? Why? What are the historical context and political economy behind it? Who benefits from it and how it is legitimized? What sorts of discursive strategies are used to legitimize it? What are the consequences? How does it change the way sport is organized and consumed, etc.? So, as you can guess, I consider match fixing as an inevitable byproduct of sports betting. So normally what I'm questioning is the very relationship between sports and gambling. So yeah, that's pretty much about my research.
All right, thank you very much for that, Minhyeok. Well, so I've got a few questions here. Hopefully, we can get some from the audience. Can ask you three and or myself and Philippa if needs be as well. I suppose we'll take it from the top again. We'll just go around in a circle if that kind of suits everyone. And I suppose I wanted to ask everyone how in the experience in their particular fields, obviously all three quite different ones, how gambling and match fixing has changed in the last couple of years, or maybe even I suppose since the virus, because everything's kind of before and after the virus, isn't it? Really these days, and I think certainly in cricket and match fixing, I mean, one of the cricket from Vanuatu was one of the big betting areas during the virus when there's nothing to go on, and it seems to me a lot of low-level stuff has persisted since then. So I guess perhaps we can look at that, how that landscape's changed in the last 2 years. Will, did you want to perhaps from the games you're pricing, what's been offered?
Yeah, I think to be honest, yeah, you're right. Lots of leagues have started popping up all over the world now, where it was really the rise of T10, which kind of started after. I mean, it was around before COVID, but it kind of really kicked off after that, when I think people realised that this real short form of the game, which can be over in an hour and a half, actually is a perfect tool for people to come and gamble on, because it essentially ends up becoming like playing roulette. You go in over or under how many runs a team is going to score in the next over, and you can get your quick hit of you're going to have a bet, and then within 2 or 3 minutes you're going to get paid out on the bet, either a winner or a loser. So that kind of thing has really cropped up a lot. We're seeing almost kind of round the clock cricket available to bet on now from various places in the world, whether it be T10, T20. It seems like there's a new tournament popping up every week at the minute. And the kind of the link to match fixing there really is that I think these leagues really wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the gambling money coming in, which is often coming from illegal forms, which then in turn leads to the players kind of spot fixing during games. There's been tournaments that have gone on where certain companies have stopped offering odds on certain teams because they've seen a specific pattern of behavior from those teams over previous games. And it's all been about moving money between different people who are behind the scenes. And ultimately, it's meant that these kind of low-level tournaments that nobody really cares about the result of the game have almost just become like a script that's been written, so that money can exchange hands and no one will notice what's been going on.
So with that, I spoke at T10 at the Play the Game conference in Loughborough this year. Philip and I were out, and some of the people here, I guess, will be watching. And so with the betting on that, normally you're betting on a bracket, aren't you? A number of overs. So in the T10, is the bracket is just one over then, is it?
Well, you can in all formats. I think even up to test level, you can actually bet on individual over scores.
Right, okay.
But the speed that T10 is played at, it's a lot more prevalent that you're only betting on kind of over by over, and it's seen as the game's over so quickly. You can almost get through a game in an hour and a half, then a new one will pop up and start, and you can kind of start again on a new game. Whereas in a longer format, even though you can still bet every over, they are still kind of linked. So I think that I think that in general, people have liked the fact that it's really quick for the actual match to finish.
And because these companies are these small format events, T10, T20, are all covered in advertising from illegal betting companies, aren't they? Which are the ones that don't report match fixing.
Yeah,
I guess that's part of the problem,
it's the only reason that I can see anyway as to why they exist, because in the stadiums that they're being played in, there's no one in there watching them. If it wasn't for gambling, I mean, who would really care what was happening? There's one that's been priced up at the minute is the Zim Afro T10. I've struggled to believe that they can actually have fan bases for these teams. So ultimately, all they are is being sponsored by gambling companies, enabling people to gamble on the matches. And I think that's really the only purpose for them.
So just fixing the games and money laundering again, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Just moving money between different parties, trying to do it subtly, sometimes succeeding, sometimes not succeeding.
If you've got David Warner tweeting about people stepping over the line, then it's not really that subtle, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
David Warner's asking for a free throw, So, well, thanks, Phil, for that. Anca, in your experience in the field that you've been working as, how do you see gambling and fixing changing?
So I'll probably say over the last few years, there's been a massive increase in online gambling and in-play betting. And I think in 2024, they reported that over 50% of the betting revenue came from in-play betting. And then, of course, we know that in-play betting actually generates risks and threats to sport integrity through betting-motivated corruption, such as match fixing, spot fixing, and the misuse of insider information. And with cricket specifically, due to the structure of the sport, it puts the sport at a higher risk of having those threats. I think it was earlier this year that a professional female cricketer actually got banned for 5 years for I can't remember exactly what she did, but it's been growing so much over the last probably 2-3 years, and I feel like the growth of in-play betting played a significant role in that.
All right, well, that's fair enough. I think the one thing about the in-play betting, I talked about this, a couple of other things that I've been at, is the collection of the data from the events. And there was a piece in the Telegraph, wasn't there, this year, about whether the scouts are turning up taking data from women's games, and you can't control the entrance to an oval. The lower level the ground is, there's often not an access gate that you can police, and so people are just turning up. So I guess that's exacerbating the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
All right, Minhyeok, how do you feel, how gambling and match fixing changed in the past couple of years from your point of view?
I think my quick review shows that what we've seen in cricket reflects patterns that have appeared in other major sports like football, tennis, basketball, etc. And one typical sort of pattern is that as regulations tighten at the top levels, corruption tends to shift toward the more, vulnerable, less regulated areas of sport. So in cricket, as the International Cricket Council has strengthened the regulations, top-tier matches and tournaments seem to be now well equipped with integrity protocols. And also players are, I think, more aware of the risks, but lower tier leagues and tournaments and some unsanctioned events seem to be increasingly offered in the gambling market and therefore made vulnerable to match fixing. And in practice, media reports show a range of examples of match fixing attempts and confirmed cases involving associate member nations, exhibition matches, etc. I think this is basically because these events have less significance, so there is loose oversight, but they are still available on the gambling market and streamed live on gambling platforms. And although the International Cricket Council appears to be making efforts to support associate nations in combating match fixing, etc., the progress takes time, and even well-informed athletes and staff may be tempted to engage in match fixing when the incentives are high enough. But I think this raises an interesting question for cricket governing bodies regarding to what extent they want their matches to be offered on the gambling platforms, and whether cricket governing bodies have the will and power to negotiate with data companies or betting companies on the issue. I think we've seen a similar debate in tennis in early 2010s. An independent review commissioned by the tennis governing bodies flagged serious integrity risks at the lower levels of the sport, and they recommended that the International Tennis Federation and the Tennis Integrity Unit stop selling live data for the lowest tier tournaments. And their argument at the time was that removing these events from betting platforms would reduce match fixing opportunities. But Sportradar, the International Tennis Federation's official data distributor at the time, they pushed it back, right? They claimed that banning official data wouldn't stop legal data collection, and that's probably it's safer to keep these matches within the regulated betting ecosystem where suspicious activity can be monitored, right? And eventually only the 15K level tournaments were removed from the data deal. I think this dispute really revealed an important thing to think about. I mean, once matches become part of the betting ecosystem, it's incredibly hard to pull them back out. And sports governing bodies have little control over which matches should be or should not be used for gambling. And perhaps cricket now faces a similar dilemma, and there might be a conversation going on, but it must be a tough decision because, I mean, they have to consider integrity risks, commercial interests, etc., and the practical realities of match fixing monitoring. Yeah,
I think the example, Minhyeok, that you gave about tennis, I think is a very particularly good one because Sportradar, these companies that collect the data from the live events, cricket, football, tennis, whatever, that they collect it, and their biggest income is selling that data to betting companies. And these games are only on betting markets because they sell it, but they've also got another role as an integrity provider. They're working with national federations, and with the as you quite rightly say, in the tennis they push back on that. Now one of the sponsor of one of the Challenger series is 1xBet, which is one of the world's biggest illegal bookmakers. So they push back. Yeah, they push back against it, and I think this is exactly the case in cricket. Where are these huge big illegal betting companies that don't report odds movements and don't share them with sport because that's just the way that they operate, and in some cases they're owned by organised crime. Where are they getting their data from? The data companies say it's not us. Well, it's not getting imagined out of nowhere, is it really? So I think it's I think that's a very good example. But I don't think it's sport. A lot of the associate members, as you quite rightly said, they're not professional, are they? The people at these associate nations. I mean, there was quite a famous game in Cyprus. So I imagine if Will's been doing it for 10 years, he'll probably remember that particular one. And there was I've got a recording on my phone somewhere here of the scorer who was selling the data to someone else, talking about bets of $5 million on a Cypriot club game. And that's just insanity. But that was only on betting markets because someone's collecting the data. And these are the same companies that are working. I mean, the ICC dropped Sport Radar, didn't they, at some point? Because Anca and I were at a talk in Play the Game a couple of weeks ago, and Alex Marshall was there. It was obviously formerly the ICC ACU guy, was talking about this and said, they dropped Sport Radar because of the conflict of interest and other things. But they're still out there working with, the IOC and other people like that. And it's I don't think enough people really understand that, personally, because I've spent so much time trying to explain it to people. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. But so where do you think, just to go back to the circle again, I mean, where do you think this is going then? Because if you've highlighted more of these games appearing on associate members, if you're collecting data for free from an associate, there's no cost to it, is there? And the sports are selling their data rights, including cricket. So where would you say it's going to go? Well, where we've come in the last couple of years, where's it going in the next couple of years?
Well, it's kind of hard to say because, as Minhyeok said, it's at the lower level where it's at most risk, and that seems to be the area which is growing at the fastest rate. So as hard as they try to try and tighten the rules around what people are allowed and not allowed to do, people bringing phones into games and all this kind of stuff, the lower down you get, the harder it is to actually exercise those rules. And especially like the example you gave at the women's games, where anyone can come into the ground with any kind of like laptop, or people sitting in the ground and doing stuff like that. There's all of those things are possible as it goes down, as the standard and as the type of people that are playing, who aren't either not being paid at all, who aren't being paid as much, they're much more liable to be taking a bribe from a gambling company, or say, can you just do this? Because it's not even just fixing a result. I think that's probably a lot of the time when people hear about match fixing, they're always thinking about someone fixing the result of a match. Because of the way that cricket works and because of the way that cricket gambling markets work, there's so many nuances involved in the game that you could very easily do quite a big fix and no one would have any idea that if you didn't see where any money was going or anything, you'd have no idea that it was happening. So even something like someone bowling a wide, or a player hitting the ball deliberately in the air so that he gets out caught, it might just look like he played a bad shot, but some of these players will be in on it and will be good enough to be able to do these things, that even though they haven't fixed the actual result of the match, they've ended up fixing a specific section of the match in a spot fix. I'm sure you remember the Pakistan case from years ago when Mohammed Amir bowled the huge no ball, and him and some of his teammates ended up going to prison for it and getting charged. That was kind of the first big spot fixing thing which was in the news. But those kind of things happen on a weekly, sometimes maybe even daily basis on games which I've either been trading or watching. And there's many more which are going on around the world, which as a company, we don't have eyes on. But I would be shocked if those kind of things weren't happening in all those leagues as well. So I guess, yeah, as time goes on and it starts growing, and if it keeps going at the exponential rate that it is at the minute, then the fixing and the gambling and the gambling companies using it for money laundering, or big players in the markets coming in and trying to move money around, I think that's kind of a scary thing to think about for someone like the ICC, because it could end up getting so big that they just can't do anything with it. It's almost become too big for them to handle.
And do you think that the whole, I mean, if a betting company wants to offer something, the ideal world is that they've got a live stream, isn't it? And then they've got live data from the ground. That's the same, in for any sport, really. Do you think maybe, in cricket now is being encouraged to stream everything, isn't it? And I know certainly during going back to the virus again, there were players in Finland getting tapped up for fixing games. And when you spoke to the people there, they said there were people walking around the ground on their phone.
Yeah.
And when they were challenged, they go, "Oh no, I'm just messaging my wife." Well, they weren't at all, or they were sat in trees and things like this.
Yeah. There was the Euro T10 league, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's it. And they're live streaming all these games. So do you think maybe associations perhaps need to be educated a bit more about actually the impact, what someone's doing at a game, or even the impact of live streaming their own game, which is very much the way.
Yeah, I think that would be the ideal case, but the concern would be that there's just so much of it going on that it's such a big piece of work to be able to undertake that almost don't really know where to start. And then I guess there's other things that kind of come with it as well, in terms of not just match fixing, but in terms of corruption in general. So quite a lot of the time would be focused on thinking about actual fixing of events or fixing of match results or things like that. But actually, there's kind of wider corruption that goes on in these kind of things. So in terms of like pitch doctoring, or in terms of a certain player being told that, or a certain coach being paid to pick a certain player in a game because he was going to be someone which was going to help the fixers be able to cause that fix in the match. So I think the anti-corruption unit are very focused at the minute on trying to like weed out any actual match fixing that's going on. But actually, there's kind of a bigger corruption element which is going on behind the scenes, which I don't think has really been talked about very much at the minute.
Do you think that's on an organisational sense? You mean,
Yeah.
rather than the betting sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
So I think one thing,
and ultimately, it does all link back to the betting. It's other plans that have been put in place so that the people that they want to act and do the fix that they want, it's all the strings that are being pulled on behind the scenes. That it would seem like a new thing's happening every week or every month at the minute with something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I know, going back to the streaming thing, I mean, clubs now in England are being encouraged to stream games on Frogbox, aren't they? Which is, most games. And what a lot of people don't know, and the ECB know, but they're not telling anyone, is it's owned by Sport Radar.
Yeah.
They know that, and they're saying stream all your games, and we can scrape all the data from Play Cricket. So that's live data, and now your game's being streamed. It's a betting product, isn't it? Really, or it could be. So
it's such a fine line, because I think that a lot of people will be very pleased with the kind of advent of these YouTube streams. People be able to follow their counties all around when they can't necessarily get to games. But when these streams crop up and these things become more digitally available, then that's always going to encourage gambling companies to increase their offering, because now they can see that people have got more eyes on it. So there's more opportunities for people to be able to have a bet while the games are going on.
No, I think you're quite right. Thank you very much, Will. Anca, what do you think? Where do you think it's going in terms of, the areas you've been researching?
Yeah, I'll probably say in terms of lower level cricket, it's going to be very, very difficult to stop match fixing. I think it's going to be very difficult to stop the growth. But I do think there's a lot of potential to sort of reduce match fixing in higher leagues with professional athletes. I mean, I will speak from my experience as a researcher, but I feel like there needs to be a shift from punishment to prevention. At the moment, a lot of athletes just get punished straight away without leagues or clubs trying to understand why athletes actually do it, why they get involved in match fixing. Because very often, from what I've seen in my research, and of course other research done by other people, a lot of athletes that do it have a gambling problem. Elite athletes, professional athletes would often use gambling as a coping mechanism. When they go through things, when they're injured and they can't play, or they might be lonely, especially within cricket. Of course, players actually travel a lot. They go through different emotions. They would use gambling as a coping mechanism. And when gambling becomes a problem, the line between using gambling as a coping mechanism and breaching the integrity rules goes away. So I feel like there needs to be a shift from punishing athletes to trying to prevent it, trying to educate them, trying to understand why they do it. I interviewed a lot of female athletes as part of my PhD, and they spoke about how they receive a lot of education around integrity. They get told what they can and can't do. Every year they get told the same thing. Those are the rules, you can't do it. However, they don't actually get a lot of education around the potential harms of gambling, why athletes specifically are at the higher risk of developing a gambling problem, and how that can potentially link to match fixing. So yeah, I would say in terms of lower level cricket, and with any other sport, it's going to be very difficult to control the growth of match fixing and corruption. But I do feel like there's potential in professional sports if they have the right prevention measures in place.
It's interesting you mentioned the players gambling themselves, because the big NBA scandal that's blown up over the last week, for those that haven't followed it, the players were playing in games run by the mafia, weren't they? And that's how they were corrupted, because they ran up bets at
Yeah, if
Not
you
poker
think
games,
about it,
things like that.
yeah, if you think about it, some, of course, with lower leagues, you have the financial motivation. So a lot of players might engage in match fixing because they have the financial motivation. But if you think about, high profile athletes who are already, very rich, they don't do it because they need the money. They do it because they have a problem. So kind of trying to understand the root of the problem, which is often overlooked. I mean, as you were mentioning, the conference Play the Game, everyone sort of spoke about banning athletes and, punishment, but no one actually spoke about, why athletes do it, and the fact that clubs, sports organizations have a duty of care for athletes. So if you ask them to wear gambling operators on the shirts, if you expose them to high levels of gambling, then you should also give them education. You should also try to prevent harm from happening.
Yeah, no, I think you're quite right. Certainly, perhaps in more Western places, again, there's been examples of players in Southeast Asia who've refused to wear the logos, aren't there? Even I think it was in one of the T10 games, one of the players took it off and said, "Give me another shirt." But that's coming from a cultural position, isn't it, rather than a sporting influence? So maybe sport's got more responsibility to step up to the plate, I guess.
100%.
No, Minhyeok, where do you see it going in the next couple of years from the work you've been doing? Oh, you're muted yourself, Minhyeok, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you. I was gonna say, maybe I'm a bit naive or I'm not very well updated on what's happening in cricket, but I thought, in terms of match fixing attempts, I think there is a decline. I feel there is a declining trend. I mean, across just general sports, but with huge disclaimer, I'll say, because I don't have any hard evidence to back this up. You know, if we just compare the situation today with for example, the late 2000s, it's clear that the gap between the fixers and catchers has narrowed significantly. And back in the mid to late 2000s, most major sports were caught off guard by the risks posed by online betting, and simply they were not prepared for match fixing. But over the past 2 decades, we've seen the development and implementation of wide range of countermeasures, and these systems are now fully up and running. And while there are still loopholes, maybe because of the new technologies like blockchain or cryptocurrency, etc., but I think sports governing bodies are much better equipped to monitor and respond to threats. So I think, I don't know, after years of scrambling to keep up, I think we've reached a kind of plateau where match fixing attempts haven't disappeared altogether, but they seem to have slowed down. But from a broader perspective, this means that sport is now more prepared to coexist with gambling. In other words, sports have evolved into reliable platforms for betting. So, for example, athletes are equipped with ethical standards. For example, how to behave as an object of betting or as a reliable pawns on the gambling table. And sports governing bodies have partnered with betting operators to implement enforceable regulations like the Macaulay Convention to protect their business interest. So while match fixing will still take place from time to time, I think it's likely to remain at a manageable level. And in this sense, I consider match fixing scandals over the past 2 decades as part of a kind of a necessary transformation. The crisis was a kind of a rite of passage to go through for sports to align its operation and practice to meet the requirements of the gambling industry. Of course, some other sports may need some time to catch up. Maybe cricket is one of those, but I don't foresee a dramatic resurgence in match fixing. And perhaps you could interpret this positively, like perhaps the sports are simply less corrupt now thanks to the effective match fixing countermeasures. But in a more realistic view, might be that many sports have become gambleized. That is, they are now increasingly shaped by the logic and demands of gambling industry. That's why there might not be as many match fixing cases as before. That's what I'm thinking.
Would you? Well, I suppose to move that on a bit around the group, and what do you think about that, Will? Because I think, from a personal point of view, cricket's the way cricket's played. There's so many options to bet within a game, aren't there? About with the runs within an over, and things like that. that I mean, and it has happened less at the top. Obviously, we've had like Brendan Taylor and Heath Street, which is a more historical thing. So at the top, it's gone. Do you
Yeah.
think it's declining or not?
I think that at the top, I think Minhyeok is probably right that it's becoming tighter, and it's probably not as prevalent as it used to be. I still think that there is some going on even at top level, international level, but probably a lot less than there used to be. But I think the issue is that it's now being filtered down to the lower levels. So even though we might not be seeing these fixes in big international events and stuff like that, the people who were making them happen at the highest level before are now just moving down the chain. And as tournaments become televised and able to bet on at the lower and lower level, which seems to be happening at the minute, it's the fixers and the gangs that are involved in this are just moving all the way down to the ones which are the events which aren't being properly ICC sanctioned. I guess there is an argument that there will come a point where there's just so much on that it's impossible to have any more. But I would still think that at a lower level there is as much fixing going on as there was in the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah. I would agree. Certainly, if you look at some of the low level stuff, I mean, Alex Marshall warned about it before he left the ACU, didn't he? About the T20, and I think the T10s personally is even worse because there's if you get more than 4 marquee players in a T10 game, they won't have anything to do with it. So like that what's it called, the Max 60 in the Cayman Islands. The Cayman Islands Federation was supposed to be monitoring that. Well, I'm sure they weren't. I mean, I asked them, they just didn't reply. But I can't imagine who in the Cayman Islands Federation understands how to monitor betting.
Yeah, but that's kind of what I mean when there's so many of these things opening up, and in like the Cayman Islands where no one's really going to be looking at it. That's perfect for what they want to be happening. They don't want any real eyes on what's going on behind the scenes, but they just want it to be available to bet on, and they want it to be, and that's why the gambling companies, the underground illegal ones especially, are the ones which are funding these events to make sure that they carry on happening.
Yeah. I know when Anca and I were in Play the Game, Alex said to me, apparently there's one of these T10 or T20 tournaments where every single advert was an illegal betting company. They didn't have a single advert from anywhere else, which kind of, I think, sums up the point you're making, doesn't it really? I mean, do you think it's diminished, Anca, in the research you've done?
No, I don't think. I think they're hiding it better. I mean, with the NBA scandal, it was a huge shock for everyone. I mean, I don't think there's been a decrease, and especially at lower level, as Will was saying, I highly doubt there will be a change.
No. One thing I was going to bring up, someone sent me this, was about prediction markets, and we touched on this briefly before we opened up to everyone. I mean, now Donald Trump's just announced on Truth Social you're going to be able to bet on prediction markets, which for those of you that don't know, that is a binary outcome where you're betting on something to happen or not to happen. And I know Will's got some expertise in this, and I wondered how, if you're opening up cricket to prediction markets, which in America are treated as a security, aren't they? They're treated as almost like a share investment rather than a betting investment. I wondered what you thought, what impact that might have.
That's kind of a bit of a separate case, because in the gambling industry that exists at the minute, the majority of the markets that are made available, if anything, it's actually almost a prerequisite that each market should have a side. So you should be betting on whether something does happen or does happen. Will this player score 50 runs, yes or no? Because then that keeps the gambling companies honest. They can't just say, will this player score 50 and have it at like 20 to 1 on or something that was a ridiculously high percentage to make, so it has to have 2 sides to make it fair. So that's kind of in that example, but then what you're talking about is slightly different. I think I'm not that clued into kind of how they're working as securities, but anything which is a 2-sided market, and you can bet on literally something to not happen, is always going to be at risk of someone who is involved making it not happen, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess going the lower down. Sorry, Anca, go on. Oh, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say I agree.
Yeah, because I guess the lower down it goes, if you're asking a player to not do something,
Yeah,
that's less a thing. What did you think about?
It's easier to not do something than it is to do something a lot of the time, isn't it?
Yes.
So
that applies to everything in life, I think, really,
yeah,
doesn't it? You know? Yeah. Minhyeok, what did you think about that?
No, I actually have no idea. But well, I basically think sports betting is inherently very risky sort of product as a type of betting, because if we think about other types of gambling, poker games or whatever, gambling normally uses inanimate objects such as cards, dice, which has no agency. But sports gambling uses human beings which have agency, and then human beings. I mean, like people like us, we are always surrounded by people who bet on sports. So sports players, we don't. They get a lot of calls from their friends and relatives asking who is injured, who is playing. We can't completely insulate them from the outside influences, right? So sports gambling has this inherent sort of risk. And then many different types of sports gambling may take different approaches to manage this risk. For example, one of my papers looked into South Korea's motorboat race betting, which is a bit it just imposes very tight regulations on the motorboat races just to avoid any kind of accusations of corrupt things. So they kind of come into the what is that? Their training camp or accommodation 2 days before the race, and then they don't know which race they're gonna run until 2 hours before the race. And when they come into their accommodation, they go through metal detectors and etc. And all those kind of security sort of measures. But most of other sports, football, cricket, we don't regulate our athletes as tightly as motorboat race betting. And that's because we believe, or we expect, sports players to behave like, or sports people, like with the highest level of integrity. But that's actually impossible. So I don't know, new kinds of financial product, betting on sport might sounds I don't know, cool, but I think it's also repeating this, I don't know, or even multiplying this risk, which sports betting inherently has.
So you think sort of more education there, really, that people need to understand they shouldn't be doing it in the right position?
No, I don't have any opinion on that. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I suppose I'll just give an example from football. Right, there was a thing that came out the other day about the Turkish referees, and there's been a huge swathe of referees in Turkish football at the very top level have all been betting on their own games, betting on things they've been doing. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing, really, and they've done it with, regulated betting companies haven't even hid their identity, and it seems that people just think they can get away with it. Do you think? I mean, we'll take it around the thing again, but I mean, do you think that the players perhaps think they can get away with it? Well, what do you think?
I guess it completely depends. I've heard of examples before, as you've mentioned, players being asked like who's injured or who's going to get you can bet on transfers, who's going to be transferred to another team, who's going to play in the next game, what kind of pitch are we expecting from the game tomorrow. So if there's a cricket match on in somewhere in the UK and there was going to be a game which someone could bet on the next day, you could be asking the groundsman if he knew what pitch was going to be used or how big he reckons the boundaries are going to be the next day and things like that. And it's whether those kind of questions and those kind of angles are all still considered part of the corruption and the match fixing or not. I think that's kind of where there's a massive grey area at the minute in terms of information and what the information can be used to do. And I think that's the real issue of how they can kind of minimize that as much as possible. But I don't think it's ever possible to completely shut that grey area down. Is going to be the issue.
Yeah, I mean, inside information essentially is what we're talking about, isn't it? Really, and the betting companies don't like that. You know, if I'm betting with your company, Will, and I've got some inside information from someone else, I mean, that's why the betting companies are closing people's accounts down, aren't they? You know, people are looking for an edge because that's the way betting works, and some of the betting companies don't want them to have an edge, do they? I don't know.
That's another
That's the grey
issue.
area.
It's another thing, which is all part of this, that the gambling industry in general, the regulations behind what gambling companies are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do is quite lax at the minute, in terms of being able to shut accounts down if anyone dares to have an edge. Then they don't want them betting with them. But I mean, even in terms of if I was trying to look for information, if I was pricing a game up, I'd be trying to find out these kind of things. I'd be trying to find out what pitch might be used, or what boundary size it might be, or is a player injured. I've even had times in the past where I've been looking at players' Instagrams to see if they're on a flight to another ground, to see if they're going to turn up at a tournament, because the odds might shift based on if a Sun on the Rhine or someone turned up to play in a kind of a low-level tournament or something like that. So, it just kind of depends really on what you consider to be what is acceptable for an athlete, a cricketer, to do and say, and what information is available to put out there for anyone to see. Because obviously in financial markets, that kind of insider trading is illegal. But there's not really that kind of punishment available in the gambling industry for this kind of stuff at the moment, but that may change. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, because that's quite a legitimate part of your job to go and do that, and it's also quite a legitimate thing for a bettor to go and do what you're doing, really, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and do you think that, from the players you've spoken to, Anca, do you think they're aware of that, the inside information side of things? Is that something that they're aware of?
Yeah, so I mean, I actually only interviewed one player that spoke a lot about, being approached to actually give information about the game and to sort of, do things within the game. And she was just talking about how specifically female athletes would get approached a lot more than male athletes. And they would say, like, I'll give you 3-4 times why you weren't. Do something in the game, or give us some information about something specific within the game. And I do feel like, of course, being able to gamble on basically anything, you can bet on anything within a game, poses a lot of risks. And with misuse of information, it's really difficult to, as Will was saying, it's very difficult to say exactly, what's allowed, what's not allowed. And there's just so many opportunities to use the information the wrong way. And it's so much to think about.
Minhyeok, did you have any thought about that, inside information, the role of that?
I've got a slightly different angle. I think sharing inside information sharing is where we can see how the ethical boundaries of sports are increasingly reshaped by the interest of the betting industry. So we have the concept of sport integrity, but on the other hand, we have the concept of betting integrity. But sometimes betting industry really, I think, intentionally conflates these two concepts, saying match fixing is a damage not only to sports, but also to us. So we have to fight against match fixing together. But no, sports integrity, betting integrity, they are not identical. So one example might be, perhaps you remember the case of Daniel Sturridge, right? So Daniel Sturridge, he what was that? So he allegedly shared the information of his potential transfer to a club with his brother, and the brother used that information to bet to place his bet, and then he got fined and he got suspended, right? And then what it shows is really. What's interesting in this case is really the reason there is a penalty for sharing inside information is only because there is a betting product on it, right? So football players these days can't even maybe talk openly about their future career plans with their family members just because there is a betting product on it. So it's about really players' human agency versus betting industries is profit making. So I think the the regulations on inside information sharing is only about protecting betting integrity, and it is nothing to do with sport integrity, because it's nothing to do with any on-field actions and, for example, Daniel Sturridge's attitude to going about his sport. So yeah, I think inside information sharing can be also interpreted in that way.
All right. No, that's I think a very fair point, really. And we've just got 7 or 8 minutes left. We haven't had any questions from the audience, so I was just gonna finish on one thing, and that was India. So in India, they've been trying to stamp out betting advertising amongst players for some period of time, and they've been playing a kind of cat and mouse game with illegal operators. But they've now seem to have taken a wider opinion. They've even banned fantasy cricket. So Dream 11's come off the India shirts, which is probably the most valuable betting sponsorship in cricket, I should imagine. So I guess what my question for everyone at the end is, what, India is a huge country. Cricket's the #1 sport. Betting's largely illegal. What do they think that impact will have on cricket? With the Indian hopefully taking the final step to ban it as best they can. I'll start with you, Will, if you like.
Yeah, my view on that would be that in India, a lot of people who haven't been taking up the opportunity to go and gamble illegally, their version of gambling has been playing the fantasy games, which is what it used to be in the US as well before the restrictions, DraftKings and all that kind of stuff. And what I will imagine will happen is that if they're not able to do their Dream 11, that will encourage more and more people to go to the black market, which is kind of one of the issues around any potential future legislation in the UK, or when people have got to be careful about the relationship that they have with the gambling companies, because if it's becoming harder and harder for people to get bets on or have accounts, then they're going to be more likely to go to illegal operators. And I imagine in India, that will be a big worry for them, that if people aren't able to use their Dream 11 accounts anymore, they're still going to have within them the kind of the want to have a gamble of sorts on the game. And unless they're able to find another way to let that happen legally, then I think that they'll end up going to black markets. In terms of the money which they'll lose from the sponsorship there, I think that they, especially kind of the IPL, they won't be short of advertisers for things other than betting. I think it's just so big that they'll be able to make their money elsewhere. But for some of the smaller tournaments and some of the ones we discussed earlier, if that was removed, then I don't think they'd be able to survive.
But I guess there's the element of those illegal companies that are trying to connect with the Indian market, advertising here, for example.
Yeah,
because at the moment, those illegal companies, as long as they don't take bets in the UK, then they can advertise here. Unless they kick them out, like 1xBet got kicked out for running the Pornhub. But so ultimately, you could see more of those companies coming over here, perhaps.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
Anca?
Yeah, what we say when it comes to, receiving any money from the gambling industry, there's been loads of talks about, sports not actually receiving money through sponsorship or advertising. And I do believe that, high performance leagues would survive without the money from the industry, but lower leagues or less established leagues wouldn't actually survive without the money from the industry. And that's applicable in the UK. And then I would imagine it'd be the same. And then I have the same views in terms of if you ban legal gambling, or if you ban anything that's legal, it just opens up the doors for a lot of illegal betting markets, and that will be a lot harder to regulate. It poses way too many risks. So trying to ban something legal would just open up the doors to everything illegal. To
the black market. Minhyeok?
Yep.
Final words?
Yeah, India is a huge, cricketing nation, but its regulation is pretty much like a prohibition model. But one Dutch academic offers a typology of contemporary gambling regulations. One is prohibition model, another is alibi model, and the risk model. But risk model is taken by most of the liberal countries like the UK, Australia, and alibi model normally takes like a state monopoly, etc. So India might have to think about maybe moving into this direction. If fully liberalizing the market is too much, then they might also have to think about have a state monopoly so that maybe some of the revenues from their gambling business could be reinvested into sports, etc. So they could be probably a realistic step, I guess.
All right. State monopolies. Yeah, I think you're right. All right. Well, thank you very much for all that. I think that's been Philippa. Thanks for your input as well. Thanks, Trevor. I think that's been a really useful discussion. Hopefully, the people watching have also enjoyed listening to it. And thank you very much for everyone for tuning in and taking part.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah,
Thanks, Steve.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
For
you,
the
Will.
panel.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Anca.
thanks for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Cheerio.
Cheers all.